So, welcome back. I am joined today by an old friend, Sue Cunningham. Hi, Sue.
Hi. So happy to be here, Wendy.
So glad to have you. Sue is a counselor. Sue is an employee of the Allender Center. You help with Recovery Week for women. Is that right, Sue? You've
Yeah.
been there a long, long time. And Sue is a poet, which is what we're going to be talking about today. But Sue, I would love to have you introduce yourself. What would you like people to know about you?
Yeah. Oh, thanks, Wendy. Yeah, I have always been really interested in people. And I think that's what probably got me to really want to be a counselor. And once I was a counselor, I became really super interested in people's stories. And the Allender Center has been a great place for me to help train and facilitate people who are looking at their stories sometimes for the first time or sometimes wanting to go a little deeper into it. And I started noticing a few years ago that poetry was part of my story. And I wouldn't have necessarily known that at certain points in my life, but now as I look back, I see how that's always kind of been part of it. And now poetry is a really big part of my life. I write it, I read it, I share it. And I started a podcast last year called Living Poetry,
Yeah, I
where
would
we
love for
use
you to share about this podcast. Yes.
yeah. One of the things that I love about being a counselor is the deep conversations that we get
Mhm.
into and the places that we go and the places I can witness God moving in people's lives and them growing and becoming who they're meant to be. But one of the downsides of it is they're all confidential. They're all behind closed
Mhm.
doors. And
Mhm.
so I was just thinking one day, and I was like, what if you could pull the curtain back and have deep conversations about people's stories that were for people to listen to? And I
Oh,
thought, what if we used a poem or a
uh-huh.
song as a portal in? And so
Yeah.
that's how living poetry came to be.
I love that. It's like a little buffer between the person's heart and the public that
Mhm.
allows them to share things that might be otherwise too sacred to say directly. So I
That's
really
yes, that's part of really yes, coming at it from the side.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so you said poetry had always been a part of your life and you saw that as a retrospective. Tell me about that.
Yeah, sometimes when we're in the middle of our stories, we can't see it, but it's only in looking back that we have the perspective. Well, when I started thinking about poetry and actually started writing in, which I can tell you how that happened. But
Yeah.
what I did was I was looking back through my journals just randomly, and I kept noticing like little scraps of poems and little things just torn out and shoved in my journal. And I thought, "Oh, these are my poems I've always been writing," but I
Mm.
never thought of them as poems. I just thought of them as what I was writing and journaling. Yeah, and
Yeah.
when I looked back and I thought, "Oh, they've been with me all this time. I was doing this even before I knew I was doing it."
Yes. Yes. Well, okay. When you said little pieces you had stuck in your journals and you realized they were actually poems, it made me think of Ocean Vuong is one of my favorite poets. And he, if people don't know, is a Vietnamese American author. He is a professor at NYU of creative writing, I think. He may teach fiction as well, but he is a New York Times best-selling poet. And as my adult kids would say, he has definitely been in my summer arc. So I've been listening to him, reading him, and he has a poem where this may be from his book, Night Sky with Exit Wounds, but he talks a lot about what formed him. And his grandmother was in a relationship with an American soldier during the Vietnamese American War. And so he has had to contend with the fact that he exists because of war.
Mhm.
And he was reading this poem the other day. I actually had it on my phone because I was thinking I might want to read it. But when you said little pieces of paper tucked in your journal, he says, maybe fragments are what make my life. I gather them all together in my arms, carry what I can from place to place. Here is where things have become disastrous. Here is where I learned to live through the pain. Here is where I've come to stand, knees trembling after being bent double in grief. And he goes on, and he also adds humor. He's such an endearing soul.
Mhm.
He's one of the
Mhm.
kindest humans that I have
Mm.
come across. But
Mm.
this idea that, yeah, life happens in little moments. Sometimes we record them in words, maybe in memories, and they all have a way of creating this mosaic of who we look back and see that we have been becoming all along. And so I
Mhm.
just love this idea of you grabbing these little snatches of paper and going, I've actually been a poet for a long time.
Yes, yes. Well, I love that you're talking about Ocean because I'm actually reading his latest novel right now. And,
The Emperor of Gladness,
yes, yes,
that is on my list.
I'm on chapter 6, I think.
Okay.
So,
Uh-huh.
yeah, it's so gorgeous, and I love
Yes.
listening to him as well. But so let me tell you a story. I was a coffee shop, and I was just waiting for my order, and so I turned around, and while I was waiting, there was this board that had all these, like, advertisements and papers just, tacked up to it. And so I was just like killing time and waiting, and I was reading, and one of the advertisements was for a poetry writing workshop.
Mm.
And I looked at it and I was like, oh, I mean, I've never thought of that. It's so interesting. I would love to be interested, and, take that. And so I went home and it was near a birthday, and I told my husband, I know what I want for my birthday. I want this writing workshop. And so he was like, okay, great. And so I signed up for the class and became like I always said to people, like, I'm in kindergarten. I don't know. Like, I haven't written a poem since I was in fifth grade. But that process began my relearning to write poetry and be educated in poetry through this writing workshop. But the thing that is important about it in terms of the fragments is you could say it was just a random day in this random coffee shop
Uh-huh.
where I look and see this random advertisement and I
Mhm.
happen to notice it and I
Uh-huh.
happen to sign up and I happen to love the workshop. Or you
Yes.
can read it back as saying, "Oh, this was always part of it. I was gonna discover the poetry in
Mhm.
myself all along. This is just the way it happened."
Okay, so you make me think that is a lovely, lovely story. And you're right. The looking back provides just a richer, probably more honest view,
Mm.
especially for those of us that believe in the hand of providence. I went to college at a very tiny women's school in Atlanta. There were 550 women. And one semester, I decided to take a poetry writing class as an elective. And I kind of thought, this will be easy and I won't have to do anything. I'll just kind of spit words out. And I remember the professor writing a comment. This, it was handwritten in those days. And then he would write little comments by hand. And so he said on one of my poems, seems you'll need to get a better grasp of the English language before you continue writing poetry. And I remember the
Oh,
dagger in my heart.
yeah.
So then we go home for break. It was Christmas break, and a friend was in the class with me. And she had originally received an A when we got our report cards in the mail. And then she was issued a second report card, and he had lowered her to a B. And I remember thinking, how do you do this with poetry? You just change your mind. And so I put poetry away after this. It gave such a bad taste in my
Yeah.
mouth.
Yeah.
But there was one poem that I wrote that my husband still remembers that was probably the first honest look I had ever taken at my story
Mm,
from my family of origin.
mhm,
And it
mm,
is tucked away somewhere in this house now. But
mm.
again, as I look back, that is one thing that has been preserved Even though
Mm,
I put poetry away all those years, it lit this interest in me of wanting to go
mm,
deeper, which I wouldn't do for decades. I wouldn't
yeah,
find the Seattle School and the Allender Center for several decades after that, but it is a part of, like you said, something that was there all along.
yeah, yeah.
So,
That's
yeah,
I
go
just wanna
ahead.
say well, I just wanna say that just reminds me of why so many people kinda have a bad taste in their mouth from poetry,
Uh-huh.
because so often it has been taught or not taught in ways that are, somewhat elitist or that you have to be a certain way or write a certain style, and it kind of turns people off or they feel like, "I don't get poetry. I'm not a
Yes.
poet."
Yes.
Yeah. And that's one of
Yes.
the things on my podcast that I really am working against, and a lot of the poets that come on and talk and say, "We wanna level the ground so that poetry is available for everyone," because I
Yes.
believe people are living poetry, and
Mhm.
people are creative and they can write. Not everyone wants to write poetry, but everyone who wants to can read and
Yes.
understand poetry if it's written well. Yes.
So when I first met you, Sue, it was 2017 or 2018, and we were both out in Seattle at the Allender Center for one of their programs. You were helping, you were probably a facilitator then, and you shared a poem at Dan's request. And neither you nor I remember exactly which poem it was, but is one you had written, and it was about losing a loved one to death. And I was so moved by it because I had recently lost my dear mother in law after a 14-year battle with cancer.
Mm,
And the year before that, we had lost the husband of a dear friend. And so death was very much a part of my young family's world in ways that we did not wish for it to be. And so I came up to you and complimented you on the poem because it had touched my heart so much. Do you remember that?
Well, actually, now that you're saying it, I do remember I was writing a lot of poems about grief because I
Okay.
was in the middle of losing a very, very dear friend to
Oh,
cancer. And
okay.
so as you're saying that, I do
Uh-huh.
remember being a little trepidatious to share in front of everyone because
Yeah,
you never know how it's
right.
gonna come across, or if people will be able to understand what you're trying to
Yes.
say.
And I did. Like, you touched a part of my heart. And there's some poet, I don't think it's bell hooks, but somebody that I recently read had made the comment, "There is a wound the shape of your words in someone's heart right now."
Mm,
And
mm,
that's what your poem did for me that day. It just landed in a place that I needed a balm. I needed that presence of someone who understood, but in a way that I didn't have to share the story. And I
mm,
also, in the moment, didn't have to help carry your grief.
mm,
Because I think
mm,
if we looked at that moment in time, we were probably both faltering a little on our feet on the
mm,
inside. And
mhm,
yet your words offered me a witness. And so the other thing I remember about you sharing that day is you talked about how poets are the truth tellers in society.
mhm,
And poets and artists bring the hope, they shed light on the way forward. And I think that's what you're saying you enjoy about counseling relationships and also about your podcast. But I'd love to hear you say a little bit more about even poetry for the times like we're living in, where there's a lot of dark and a lot of hopeless all around, no
yeah,
matter where you're sitting.
yes, that is true. Poets have been throughout time and memorial, like, throughout history. Poets are the truth tellers. They speak of protest, and they speak of things that other people don't wanna talk about. This is from the prophets, from
Hmm.
all the way back in every culture. There are always poets, just like there are always artists, and different artists are always responding to current events, to what's happening. A lot of times people will say, "This is a political poem," or "This is not a political poem." And sometimes I would say, like, every poem is a political poem
Mm.
because every poem is coming out of a time. And
Yeah.
whether you're depending on how well you can do your craft, you're not hitting people
Mhm.
over the head with it, but you're
Mhm.
allowing people to find these ways in from the slant, as Emily Dickinson says, from a hidden place, maybe through a metaphor, through
Uh-huh.
something that opens up a portal or a gate that someone can say, "Oh, I can see something that I didn't see before." There's usually some turn or surprise in a poem,
Mhm.
so that
Yeah.
throughout all kinds of conflicts, like I'm Armenian, and so I talk a lot about the Armenian genocide, and one of the things that happened the night before the people were gonna round up the people to start the systematic genocide, the night before, they took all the artists and poets and intellectuals and doctors, and they eliminated them first. So I always say we take the poets first. So when times are tough, listen to the poets because
Yeah.
they're the ones, and, this comes out in song as well. A lot of times the anthems, the
Mm.
visual art, they give us a place to locate our grief, as you were saying, our
Yeah.
lament, our protest, our opposition, our complaint. I mean, the book
Yeah.
of Psalms is full. I was just reading the book of Psalms in the Old Testament is full of more lament and complaint psalms than any other kind of
Than
psalm.
any other.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my heart dropped when you said
Mm,
that about the eve of the Armenian genocide. And what they were doing is they were taking away the hope of the people and those who could see a vision of
yes.
something more.
Yeah.
And yeah, just I felt that in my stomach and
Mhm.
thinking Elie Wiesel writes so much about hope
Yeah.
and so much about the necessity of it for survival. And so there's a
Mm,
way that the people were being broken down before their bodies were decimated.
mm,
Like
mm,
the emotion of hope was killed
mm,
off
mm,
first. And
mm.
just the cruelty and the evil of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, and just
Um,
how it's ongoing, it's happening right now. If you wanna know if you do need hope sometimes, it's gonna be very often through poets or through poetry or through a song that to say, "Okay, this gives me courage, this kind of fortifies me." And when you
yeah.
don't have it, it's a huge loss, you're right.
And a minute ago, you said everyone is a poet, and your podcast is living poetry, that people are poetry, that our lives
Mhm,
are.
mhm.
And in my private practice, I work with children as well as adults, and I see family units at times. And so I do a lot of art based therapy to help people engage the stories of their lives that are painful. And so I have a client who has been through a lot of hard things. And most recently, she's had a lot of pain in the context of her schooling situation. And I would notice that when she would get dysregulated, she would want to ask me questions about who was the next client. Obviously, I was very veiled in what I would tell, but she's a young teen and she would want to know who's coming next and what do they need because I want to write them something on the whiteboard to encourage.
Mm,
Or she would
mm,
say, can I write letters to the people that suffered in Hurricane Helene, which was here in Asheville recently?
mm,
And what she began spitting out was poetry. And so when she didn't write it, but maybe she was making something out of clay and just riffing, I began to take dictation. And I would say, you have written the most powerful poem. And then she began to do it at home and send me the words. And
Mm,
it
wow.
ministered to and strengthened me as well as her parents because she was putting words of truth to the reality she was living. It would have been easy for us to say, middle school's only a season, it'll be fine. But her
Right.
heart was contending with so much. And I'm like, this girl is a monumental poet. Her words are so profound. And so I just love the capturing of story.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say a couple things about that experience. One is you were a witness to her poetry
Mhm.
and you were able to name it. And that is so important. And that's often what poetry does. So you were a witness to her, and then she was a witness to the next person. So her
Yes.
poems could also be called poetry of witness. It says,
Hmm.
I want to tell you something that I know from my life and my story that I've witnessed as a gift, as an offering to the next person, whoever that may be.
Yes. Yes.
And so I think it's great that you were modeling that for her and doing that for her, and then reminding her of what she couldn't see herself. So often we say we can't see our own faces. We need
Hmm.
someone else to describe them for us. So when you
Yes.
described for her who, what you saw and who she was becoming, then
Yeah.
that gave her a better view, an opportunity to see something that she maybe wouldn't have seen.
Yeah. I mean, it's been stunning and it has been a beautiful thing to witness her. And Ocean Vuong comes back to mind again
Yeah.
because I heard him say recently, and this may be a poem that he has, but he used the phrase, take the shoes off of your voice. And he says when he was little, there was a rule you always took your shoes off. Well, that was in my house in the South as well, but it was so you didn't get dirt on the clean floor. He says that was really not the case. It was more that when you showed up in someone's home, you were showing the honor of taking your shoes off by letting them know you knew you were entering a sacred space. And so he says that the same
Yeah.
is true with our words. And so I feel like that's what she was essentially doing in being witnessed. She was beginning to realize she actually understands this life she is living. And she's actually creating her own pathway of hope as she speaks to it. And so to watch her move from writing words to others to writing words for herself was beautiful.
Yeah.
So, so the time goes so fast, but I want to save a few minutes to hear one of your poems.
Okay.
And then I think I'll share one of mine. And it might be fun to have you back again where we could actually talk through what we hear in each other's poetry. But I would at least like the chance to witness one of yours if you're willing.
Yeah, that would be great. I started writing I've written a lot of poems about my family of origin and my grandparents' story as a genocide survivor, granddaughter of genocide survivors. And then I started writing what I started calling healing poems. And these were just poems that I would write just that gave me a balm, like you were saying
Hmm.
before, that gave me some courage, some encouragement.
Hmm.
And so this is one, I'll read it.
Okay.
It's called Raison d'être. Lucky you, upgraded on American Airlines, aisle seat 4D in first class. 30 minutes from landing in Fresno, your seatmate, a frail, weathered, ashen haired woman, rises for the restroom. As she passes you, she buckles at the knees, falls back, lands straight into your arms. Airlessly, you catch her as if you do this every day. You hold someone else's grandmother, solid as granite
Mm.
rock, like you belong in Yosemite, where she's going, she tells you. Maybe that's your raison d'etre, to hold the falling, a giant sequoia, limber as limbs, standing sturdy and immovable in currents of wind.
Mm. So tell us what raison d'etre means.
It's like your reason for living. It's French for
Okay.
reason to be. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And what made this woman stick in your memory? What is it
Well,
about this
just the
grandmotherly figure?
well, just the experience of I was just standing there waiting for her to pass, and she literally falls, and I grabbed her, and I held her, and it was that feeling of, "Oh my gosh," if you've ever wondered if you were in the right place at the right time,
Uh-huh.
it
You
was that.
literally were.
I
Yes.
literally was, and it felt so good. It felt so good to, like, kind of think, "Oh, for once in my life, I have no doubt I should have been right here because I caught her, and she didn't fall, and she didn't break her hip, and she could still have her vacation," and
Yes.
all the things that were going through my mind of, "Oh my gosh," and it happened so fast, and
Uh-huh.
it was over so fast. It was, like, probably 10 seconds.
Well, but then there's this intersection with your own grandmother that you alluded
Um
to a minute ago, right? Your grandmother was a survivor of the Armenian Holocaust. Is that what you were saying?
No, I was just that no, that was I was just saying that she was someone's grandmother, and I got
Oh,
to hold someone else's grandmother.
got it. But did you have grandparents who
Oh, I
survived?
did. Yes, I did.
Yes.
Yes, I
Okay.
did.
Got it. So I
Yes,
knew she
yes,
was not your grandmother, but there's this
yes.
intersection where she
Yeah,
is
yeah,
very
I guess you could say that.
reminiscent.
Yeah, I guess you could say that. Yeah, that's great. That's great, Wendy. Yeah,
Well, I'm just thinking the fact that your grandmother survived means you are here. And
exactly.
then you are now sustaining a grandmother, you know?
Oh, I
So
love that. Yeah, that's good. That's really
that's
good.
that's beautiful. Maybe I learned
Yeah.
something in that poetry class that I didn't know English well enough for yet.
I think you
Yeah.
most
It's
certainly did. Most certainly.
um
Yeah.
okay, so I'm going to read one.
Yeah.
Let's see here. I think I'm going to read this one called A Thousand Tiny Resurrections. And I also write for lamentation and for the pursuit of personal healing. So it's
Mhm.
usually something I'm living through in some way that has kicked off this idea. Or, like you said, oftentimes a comment will be made by a client and that will set a trajectory of thinking. And I will sit down at a coffee shop and it will pour out. This is called A Thousand Tiny Resurrections. God, the death in my life has not been limited to a singular physical one. Rather, it comes to me daily, sometimes hour by hour, in its assorted forms. A word from powerful lips spoken to a press, a dream for goodness evaporating into an atmosphere of it will never work. Cries from the mouths of the vulnerable being met with indifference. Bodies betrayed by ratios of melanin which were never meant to be simplified. Love legislated into governmental permissions or vetoes. Hope submerged in a pit of despair, forced under by the sharp impact of broken commitments. Surrounded by pain, how do I bring my hope in the resurrection via a thousand tiny offerings in the catacombs? My heart tells me this by bringing bouquets of wildflowers to ruins the storms left behind, by placing a trembling hand on the heavy laden shoulders of my neighbors, through silence held on the heels of deep pain expressed aloud, by smearing ashes on her chest, a tangible portrayal of the state of her broken heart, using linen to remove the marks of shame, and then anointing her head with rose oil. She is new and oh so holy. By holding hands and witnessing tears as bodies huddle together, wondering the when, the if of relief. By not giving answers, but sitting with questions, so as to honor the complexity of human suffering and heartbreak. By pleading with God in the moments that are full of calamity and absent hope. Through staying close to the unprotected as the bloodshed carries on. By remembering the cloud of witnesses for whom desolation, not deliverance and redemption, was the purview. By choosing their faithfulness over my futility and looking for the sunrise every morning anyway. By planting seeds, even though the last harvest froze, and waiting for the dough to rise, there's nothing better to do than to expect new life to come from dead places.
Wendy, that's
There.
beautiful. I could hear, like, we may call that a list poem because there's like these
Mm.
two lists, these lists of the really hard, fractured things you're lamenting,
Mhm.
and then this list of hope and ideas of what you can do. I love the flower, bringing the flowers. It's beautiful, very embodied.
Thanks. And I feel like today, and probably always in this world, that's what our hope needs. It needs embodied forms.
Mhm.
And it needs ways that we choose hope and we choose to be a people of hope in the moment by moment actions. And that's often, I don't have certainty. I have a hope of a win. Sometimes I wonder an if, but I feel
Yeah.
I have to act in hope in order to perpetuate my faith. So,
Yeah. When you create, you talked about healing, and
mhm,
we can get into this another time if you want, but
mm,
it's in the creating that our bodies both physiologically and emotionally change. We get
mm,
we get a we get a counter move. Our parasympathetic system moves counter to our sympathetic nervous system. So we're in fight and flight, but then when our parasympathetic nervous system kicks in, it takes us to places of rest and
yes.
calm and ease. And that's what creativity does to the body.
Mm,
So if you feel differently in your body after writing that poem,
yes.
like you do with your clients or you do with yourself,
Mhm.
it's for really, really good reasons.
I love that. And yeah, I would love to talk about that another time. So thank you, Sue, for who you are, for what you bring to the world, for your podcast and your poetry. And your podcast is Living Poetry. Where can people find it?
Pretty much anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple,
Hey,
Spotify. Yeah.
hey. Well, Sue Cunningham, thank you so much. It's been a delight.
Thanks, Wendy.